This evaluation was looking at the entire humanitarian systems response between 2021 and 2024 to the drought in Somalia, which was the worst drought experienced by East Africa in 40 years. And when I say the entire system, what I really mean by that is the Interagency Standing Committee, or the IASC, and its partners. This is the highest level humanitarian coordination forum in the UN, and it brings together UN agencies, Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and NGO consortia. So this evaluation was really looking at how well all the parts of the system pulled together to collectively respond to the drought. It was commissioned by the Interagency Humanitarian Evaluation Steering Group, which is made up of evaluation directors from IAC agencies. And this group routinely evaluates humanitarian responses to really large, big emergencies such as Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover, Ethiopia during the conflict, or to the earthquakes that hit Syria and Turkey. Interagency humanitarian evaluations, including this one, offer insights into the humanitarian system's performance. They help decision makers improve ongoing and future humanitarian assistance. They identify what's working well, what's not, and of course, where improvements are needed. The evaluation itself was carried out by Dr. Julia Stietz from the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin, and her colleague Elias Sagmeister, and Noura Mahmoud and her colleagues at Ragsan, which is a social research firm in Somalia. So there was one evaluation question that used the connectedness criterion, and that was how well did the response advance resilience and link to development efforts. So you can see that with this question, we were looking at both the temporal and relational aspects of connectedness. And by temporal, I mean the link between the immediate aims of the response, which is, of course, to save lives, and the longer-term aims of the response about building resilience, which, of course, can happen at the same time. So these were the stated aims of the humanitarian response, but the evaluation did highlight some tension between these aims. Because naturally, with famine looming on the horizon, resources immediately shifted to immediate relief. And this happened sometimes at the expense of resilience programming. Now, I also mentioned that we looked at the relational side of connectedness. So this is really about looking about how the humanitarian response itself connected with other actors. For me, the most eye-opening part was about how humanitarian aid influences behavior. And credit here goes to the evaluation team for their really interesting analysis, but also for keeping it front and center throughout the evaluation process and featuring it quite heavily in the final evaluation report. So this is really, completely separate from other actors within the life-saving mandate, with funding that is earmarked for emergency response. Um, it's critical that interventions are aware of the incentives they're creating, which can at times, unwittingly undermine the very things that the response is trying to pursue. And I hope of what was learned through this evaluation can be applied not just in Somalia, but in other crises around the world and in future crises as well. Another thing I think I'll say, it's typical for humanitarian evaluations to have a question or a sub-question about the nexus. So this is usually towards the end of the list of questions, and it's something like, how well did the response advance the HD or HDP nexus? And evaluation teams can answer this question in a variety of ways. But the distinction under the new connectedness criterion, I think will force evaluation managers and evaluation teams to think about both the temporal and the relational aspects of connectedness, which I think overall is a good thing. I hope, it will lead to more evidence about what works and what doesn't work, and ultimately make humanitarian assistance more connected. I think the connectedness analysis was useful mainly in shining a light on these issues, which the evaluation itself found tend to get somewhat sidelined during a massive scale up in an acute emergency. I think it's worth noting that when the evaluation team asked people affected by the drought, what would they recommend to aid providers? Overwhelmingly, the answer was a desire for assistance to focus on sustainable solutions rather than the short-term relief. So we had requests for livelihood support, local resilience, infrastructure projects, that kind of thing. And I think the connectedness analysis in this evaluation help identifies ways to do exactly that, to support resilience, even from the humanitarian angle. In terms of moving the needle on some of the issues, I would say yes. was useful. The humanitarian community in Somalia is now working on a plan to implement all the recommendations from this evaluation. It's worth noting, I think, that some of the issues highlighted by the report were perhaps known to the humanitarian community, but the evaluation, I think, helped put the spotlight on them and helped sort of put them back at the top of the agenda on people's priorities.